Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. Today, we are talking about a case that was actually recommended to me and Derek for the podcast that we do, Crime Weekly. But I stole it. Okay, I definitely stole this case because when I was looking into it, I got so interested that I had to steal it for YouTube because this is a case that really needs to be talked about with the support of visual aids and pictures. It really needs the time to devote to it. And it has been a long time since a case has grabbed me and intrigued me as much as this one. So I'm really, really glad I get to present it to all of you and then hopefully engage in really intelligent and meaningful conversation with you in the comment section because this case is crazy and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about it. And unfortunately, on podcasts, there is no comment section, although I think there should be. So today we're talking about the death of 24-year-old Phoebe Handsjuk, a young, vibrant, and beautiful woman who was found dead at the bottom of a trash chute in an upscale Melbourne, Australia apartment building in 2010. So we're going to the land down under today. And as with any other case, of course, I've developed my own opinions and theories, but in the interest of being fair and unbiased, we are going to examine each piece of evidence separately and hopefully with an open mind. And after all of that, we should be able to give an educated guess, an educated response to what I believe could have happened. I do want to give some shout outs because I was able to find some great resources during my research. The first thing I did was read a book called Into the Darkness, The Mysterious Death of Phoebe Handsjuk, and this was written by true crime writer Robin Bowles. A big part of my research process as well is that when I'm not actively sitting down and reading or on the computer, I will just put my headphones in and sort of immerse myself in the case that I'm covering while I'm covering it, whether it be through, listening to an audiobook or listening to podcasts about this case while I'm giving Bella a bath or making dinner. I just try to have this case in my ears 24/7 until I'm done with it. And while I was doing this, I ran into two podcasts that were very well done and very helpful to me. The first is called Phoebe's Fall, and it was done by The Age, which is a media outlet in Melbourne, Australia, and I also listened to the Morbid podcast's coverage on this case. And as always, the lovely ladies over there delivered the information in a really great way. So if you're interested in this case, you can go and check those sources out. And stay tuned till the end of the video because I want to do a creator shout out. I recently found a content creator that I think is just absolutely amazing, and I want to introduce you guys to her. So keep an eye out for that or an ear out for that at the end. But before we get started, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Casetify. I have been using Casetify cases exclusively for well over a year now, and I don't see a reason to ever really use anything else because I love them so much. They do everything I need. They look cool. They are slim. They're super protective. Never have I found a more protective phone case because I drop my phone a lot. And my phone's very important to me because it has all my personal stuff like family pictures and videos, but it's also my lifeline to the world, to you guys, especially during these times when we can't really see everyone in person. My phone allows me to text and FaceTime with friends and family, and it's also where I do most of my work, from emails to responding to comments on YouTube to posting on Instagram. So the whole point of me telling you this is to show that our phones are pretty essential, and we should do all we can to protect them, like they're our little babies. Casetify has just launched a new collection of drop-tested and antimicrobial cases. And antimicrobial, I hope I said it right, but it pretty much means that it doesn't let bacteria stay on your phone. I believe that these cases with this coating kill up to 99% of the bacteria and the germs and stuff on your phone. And I remember in college, I took a biology class and they actually had us swab our phones to see how much bacteria and stuff is on there. And I think that your phone is dirtier than a toilet seat. And Casetify's Ultra Impact case is the world's slimmest, most protective case out there. They've upped the innovation by engineering slim bumpers on the corners to make the case drop-proof up to 6.6 feet. So in tech terms, this means that the cases from Casetify offer 3 times military-grade protection. So Casetify has dared us to drop it, and let's put it to the test. Not only are the cases protective, but they're so cool looking and they come in tons of different designs, so you can pick your favorite color or choose a design that reflects your personal style, or you can design a case yourself by adding your name or your initials. And that's exactly what I've done with this case, which is one of my all-time favorites. It says Harlowe on it, but look. So I have way too much fun playing with this case when it's on my phone. I just stand there and look at it and turn it around all the time. Their cases are also partially made from recycled plastic, and they're engineered with a 2-layer construction of Chi-Tech, so you can feel really good about your purchase, knowing that no matter how clumsy you are or how many times you drop your phone, you are covered. So I purchased this case from Casetify because I wanted to use it for Halloween, but I love it so much, I think I want to use it more than just for Halloween, like all the time. Look at the cute skeletons. They're stretching, they're doing yoga, they're being active. Good for them. So if you're looking for a new and awesome case for your phone that will keep it protected, but also not have it looking like it's protected, you remember those big cases that were just huge and you had to like open 6 different things and unlock 3 padlocks to even get into your case? Yeah, I can't mess with those. So go to casetify.com/stephanieharlowe today and get 20% off your purchase. That's casetify.com/stephanieharlowe for 20% off. And their glass screen protectors are freaking amazing too. Thank you so much to Casetify for sponsoring this video, and let's dive in. So the scene of our story is set in the beautiful city of Melbourne, Australia, but more specifically, the Valencia. And the Valencia is an exclusive apartment tower that was built in 2008. So this is a fancy place, right, where fancy people live. It's located at 454 St. Kilda Road in Melbourne's business district. From the outside, it looks so cool. It looks like this glistening skyscraper. It has this black mirrored edifice. It just looks like this enormous black glass tower. And inside, it holds 23 floors, along with all the amenities that a fancy rich person could ever ask for. They've got a 24-hour pool and spa, a 24-hour gym, 24-hour security cameras. They've got a weekly book club. They've got a weekly wine club. They also appear to have an Italian restaurant located right in the building. So these people during quarantine, they were set, right? They didn't have to go anywhere. And I mean, even on a regular day where there's no quarantine, you would never have to leave home if you didn't want to. They also have this key card system. So every resident would have their own key fob, and this key fob would give them access to the parking garage that's located under the building. They would have their own assigned parking space or parking spaces. They would also need to use the key fob to enter the Valencia, whether from the garage or through the double security entrance at the front door. These key fobs are also floor specific, so a resident would need to use it in the elevator to get to the floor that they lived on. And then they would have to use it again to enter their specific apartment located on that floor. The Valencia has been described as luxury living at its best and one of Melbourne's most sought-after addresses. If you're going to purchase one of these apartments, they will usually run you about $660,000. It's expensive for an apartment. Like, you could buy a mansion. You could buy a mansion for $660,000 with your own damn pool and your own gym. Inside, the apartments are tastefully decorated, usually with marble and glass and stainless steel. And from the walls of your apartment that are almost made completely of windows, you can be treated to a gorgeous view of the city from every angle. They've got covered balconies, recessed lighting, walk-in closets, and all that jazz. And this is where Phoebe Handsjuk was living with her boyfriend, Anthony Hampel, when her life ended on December 2nd, 2010. A big reason of why I was so attracted to and interested in this case was because of Phoebe herself. Phoebe was born to her parents, Natalie and Len, via emergency C-section in the early morning hours of May 9th, 1986. She was their first child and only daughter, but in 1988, her younger brother Tom was born, and 4 years later, another son, Nikolai, was brought into the world. Phoebe's father, Len Handsjuk, was a psychiatrist who was running a private practice, and he'd employed a receptionist named Jeanette Campbell, who turned out to be Natalie's mother, and Natalie is Phoebe Handsjuk's mother. And Jeanette's actually the one who introduced Len to her daughter, Natalie. And then Len and Natalie got married, they started having children, and overall the Handsjuks had a very happy family, and they lived good lives. They lived in Richmond, which is a suburb of Melbourne, just 2 miles away from the business district. They lived in a nice big house. They had a good life. Phoebe attended the Sophia Mundy Steiner School in Abbotsford, and this was the perfect place for someone like Phoebe, who has been described as an intensely creative and energetic wild child. She was afraid of nothing, and she was down for anything. Her mother, Natalie, said that Phoebe drove through life like she stole it. And the Sophia Mundy School was very big on a holistic teaching model, which would focus on each student's specific talents, skills, and interests, which I think all schools should be like that. There was a lot of focus on the arts at this school, and from a young age, Phoebe showed promise in many areas of the arts. She was a very good painter, she liked to draw, and she wrote constantly, whether she was composing a poem or scribbling in her diary, a habit that she kept all her life. Reading about Phoebe, it honestly kind of seemed like there wasn't anything she wasn't good at. It seemed as if she had this very well-rounded personality, and if she set her mind on doing something, she would find a way to accomplish it. She was also incredibly athletic. She ran, she played basketball in school, and when it came to sports and life, Phoebe could have a very competitive edge to her. Her parents, Natalie and Len, recalled that they would go to her school basketball game, and Phoebe would be playing normally, but then she would get fouled. And after that, it was like a switch had flipped inside of her. Suddenly, she was giving it her all. She was a rocket out on the court, running up and down, scoring baskets, and all the parents watching would laugh and say, what got into Phoebe? Why doesn't she play like this all the time? It was because someone had wronged her, and Phoebe couldn't let that stand. Phoebe and her family were very close, but there were two relatives who she connected with deeply. Her younger brother, Tom, who was her best friend in childhood, and her maternal grandmother, Jeanette, who would become a confidant to Phoebe during her adolescent years and after. Tom Handsjuk remembers that his sister was this unstoppable force. They would be out playing, and someone would say, that tree is too big to climb. And Phoebe would take this almost as a challenge, and she'd say, let's do it. Let's climb that tree. And then she would. And she was very physically fit. She was very athletic, even as a kid. And as she grew up, she got more athletic, and she really enjoyed sort of almost performing dangerous stunts, kind of. She liked to climb high things, almost like a daredevil. And there's a lot of stories from later on when she became like a teenager and on that people who knew her would tell, saying she would do these sorts of stunts. So you could say that she had a little bit of a risk-taking personality. From a very young age, Phoebe was incredibly social and friendly. She made a lot of friends very quickly, very easily, but she really loved being outside in nature. Open spaces, wild spaces, the forests, the beach, they called to her heart. So we have this very outgoing, pretty, talented, socially competent individual here. But there was more to Phoebe than met the eye. As she transitioned into her teenage years, Phoebe began struggling with emotional issues and mental health issues, on top of the normal hormonal and life changes that a young girl experiences as they grew up. So she's handling a lot as a young child. Her grandmother, Jeanette, had a front row seat to these ups and downs, since Phoebe trusted that if she told Jeanette something, it would stay between them. At a very young age, around 13, Phoebe began hanging out with a group of girls who were experimenting with alcohol and drugs like marijuana, ecstasy, and speed. From what I can tell, Phoebe and her girlfriends were all well-educated. They came from good families, but they were engaging in dangerous behaviors, especially for their age. Phoebe and her friends would go out to the clubs with fake IDs, and at the age of 13, they obviously didn't have, a lot of money, but Phoebe's friends would marvel at how they could all go out with $20 to spend between them. And within no time, Phoebe would wander off and return with more than enough alcohol and drugs to share. This put her grandmother, Jeanette, in a tough position. Phoebe would confide in her that she was taking drugs and drinking, although she never got specific about which drugs she was experimenting with. And Jeanette would give her advice that stemmed from her own previous experiences with drugs like LSD. Jeanette knew that Phoebe was extremely sensitive and she was prone to mood swings, so she told her granddaughter, there's certain people who should just not take drugs because taking drugs could magnify those areas of your personality, and it was usually not a great outcome. Like any other young teenager, Phoebe and her friends did everything together for a long time. One of her friends, Julie, entered a modeling contest in the mall, and this contest was being held by Dolly, which is a magazine for teens. So her friends, the other girls, entered as well. Julie, who would actually later go on to become an international model, she won first place, and Phoebe was the runner-up. Almost everyone who knew Phoebe said the exact same things about her. She was beautiful, but aside from that physical beauty, there was something else that made her almost irresistible to people, especially men. She was magnetic. She had an aura of mystery around her. She made very intense eye contact, and her friends recall that whenever they would go out anywhere with her, people would stop and look at Phoebe and make an effort to be close to her and to get to know her. Phoebe's friend from school, Alice Jagger, said, quote, "You could never own Phoebe. She could never be kept by someone. She was a floater. She drifted in and out of people's lives at her own will," end quote. There are reports that Phoebe was not completely comfortable with the spell that she cast on people because she could never tell if they were drawn to her because of how she looked or who she was as a person. One part of her enjoyed and wanted the attention. Another part of her was uncomfortable with it, and she would drink to suppress her anxiety in large crowds and around strangers. So she didn't mind being around friends, but if they went out and there was people there that she wouldn't know and these people would approach her and want to talk to her, she would drink to almost kind of push her anxiety down so she wouldn't freak out. In a diary entry that Phoebe wrote later in life, you can see that this feeling followed her into adulthood. But where her young teenager self maybe would have tried to dull her shine, to not bring that attention, older Phoebe seems to have almost embraced it. She writes, quote, "Men of all ages, countries, states come to see me, ask my name, each with the same curiosity of wanting to know more of what they know nothing about. 'You're so mysterious,' they say. 'Tell me what you're feeling.' Recently, I have been reminded of my own power, the fierceness of it, and its ability to create and destroy. Once I fought it, but now I'm beginning to realize that in doing that, I am denying the very essence of who I am." End quote. Alice Jagger confirmed this power, saying, quote, "Phoebe put a spell on boys. She was gorgeous. If she put the tiniest bit of effort into her appearance, she had men and boys dropping at her feet. I took her to a party once where 5 guys fell at her feet in half an hour. It was fascinating to watch, but not all that good for her friends, as you'd go to a party with her and end up on your own." End quote. A 14-year-old boy who met young Phoebe for the first time at a cafe said that even so many years later, the memory of meeting her was still so fresh and vivid that he remembered it like it was yesterday. He said, quote, "The aura and beauty that Phoebe had would light up a room. Sometimes I think this worked against her. She was so beautiful, and you could tell she didn't want to be in the spotlight. Although she was loved by so many, she could never be yours to keep. You could only have Phoebe for a moment, and then she'd be gone without a trace." End quote. So they make her sound almost otherworldly, right? Like some untouchable Greek goddess that went through the world burning brightly, dazzling all the mortals who laid eyes upon her. But as we know from Greek mythology, even Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, struggled with her own personal issues and self-doubt. By the time she was 15, a rift had developed between Phoebe's parents and their relationship was going downhill fast. So she ran away and began living in a small apartment in Epping with 5 other girls and a newborn baby. For 8 weeks, while Phoebe was slumming it and getting drugs delivered to her from her friend Julie, her parents had no idea where she was. But she eventually did return home after the father of the newborn baby that she was living with, who had just been released from prison, pulled a knife on his partner, and Phoebe got scared. When she was 16, several things happened in Phoebe's life. She began having obvious mood swings, and she thought that she was depressed. So her father, who remember was a psychiatrist, he referred his daughter to a colleague who ended up prescribing Phoebe antidepressants. Len and Natalie, Phoebe's parents, they weren't happy about Phoebe being on this medication at such a young age, especially because Phoebe would sort of take it upon herself to stop and resume the medication whenever she felt like it. So she would take it, and then when she was feeling better, she would stop taking it. And we know that this can be very dangerous when it comes to antidepressants. Additionally, at the age of 16, Phoebe began an affair with her 30-year-old teacher at the Sophia Mundy School. Now, they kept it secret for a long time for obvious reasons, and I really do try hard not to judge when I'm covering these cases because I don't know everybody's life. I don't know what they got going on, but it really did bother me how no one in her family seemed fazed by this relationship. In fact, they spoke about it quite positively. They said he was a nice guy, and they believed that he and Phoebe had a loving and stable relationship. But there's obviously an unequal power dynamic here, right? He was twice her age and a teacher. She was under the age of 18, a student, still technically a child in the eyes of the law, and it just never should have happened. Now, Phoebe's friend Alice Jagger, who went to the same school, remembered that this teacher was a nice guy, he was sweet and adventurous, and she said that she believed he had, quote, just fell in love with a beautiful girl who had him under her spell, end quote. And this is where I sort of just inwardly cringed. And outwardly. I outwardly cringe too, because it almost makes it seem as if Phoebe was out there just waving her magic wand over these older men who had no control over their actions in the presence of this enchantress. But in reality, like I said, Phoebe was 16 years old, still legally a child, and this teacher was twice her age, a grown-ass man who knew it was not only wrong to sleep with his student, morally, right, but illegal to sleep with a minor. And yeah, he still did it. And we're all supposed to accept that this was some great love story, but I don't. Eventually, Phoebe left the Sophia Mundy School and she enrolled at Lionel Hall Community School in Richmond. And most people think that she switched schools because, her boyfriend was teaching at the Sophia Mundy School. And Phoebe's grown-ass boyfriend, he also played in a band. And this made sense because Phoebe's type was usually sort of the tortured artist type, the musicians, the painters, people who created something from nothing, people who felt things deeply, like her. And when she would go to hear him play at bars, Phoebe was in her element, dressed in black from head to toe, wearing these Angelina Jolie, Lara Croft tall boots. Apparently, Phoebe's teacher boyfriend even moved in to Natalie's house with Phoebe. Natalie's Phoebe's mother, and they were together for at least 2 years. But her next boyfriend was also an older man, and he was a musician and an actor. And Phoebe's mother, Natalie, wonders if this interest in older men runs in their family. She told the Phoebe's Fall podcast that she herself had engaged in an affair with one of her teachers when she was 16. And when she married her husband, Len, he was 14 years older than she was. Additionally, Phoebe's grandmother and Natalie's mother, Jeanette, had married a man who was 11 years older than she was. And I mean, this is fair. When I was a young woman, I could see having an attraction to older men. I mean, when I was 16, I had a big-time crush on Pierce Brosnan, and that's fine. But it would have been a completely different story if Pierce Brosnan and I had started living together, right? It would have been weird. I don't care what you say about Pierce Brosnan, man. He is still a silver-haired fox. Natalie, Phoebe's mother, also told a story of how Phoebe had developed an obsession for a married man with children who lived next door to the Handsjuks. Apparently, Phoebe had created this sort of tissue paper art installation for him. And this installation featured 2 figures, a man and a woman, who were locked in an embrace. Now, if you look closely at the figure of the man, there's some sort of tiny design drawn all over it. But if you looked very closely, you could see that this wasn't a design at all. They were words written in very, 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 very small script. And this was Phoebe telling this man how she felt about him in words that she felt that she could never say out loud. And in general, Phoebe does seem to have this type of personality when she felt attracted to someone or drawn to them. When she set her sights on a man, she would become obsessed and infatuated. It was all she could think about, all she could write about. And for a woman who was almost always the one being pursued, she might have had a hard time handling any kind of rejection, and that's something that we will talk about soon. In her mid-teens, Phoebe's drinking went from being a social thing that she did to quell her anxiety to becoming a full-blown problem. And in combination with her depression, it certainly didn't help to make things better because alcohol does have a depressive sort of quality. Those who knew her, especially her parents, remembered that although she would drink often, she was a lightweight. It didn't take much to get her drunk, and after only a few drinks, she would be uncoordinated and messy, and she had a tendency to hurt herself after a few drinks. One day, Natalie came home and she found blood on the trampoline and the bathroom sink, and when she saw her daughter later, Phoebe explained that she'd been making a piece of art and she'd cut her hand. But Natalie knew that she must have been drinking when she cut her hand. Phoebe's grandmother, Jeanette, also recalled having coffee with Phoebe one afternoon, and she spotted, like a bandage on her arm. And Phoebe told Jeanette that she'd cut herself deliberately, saying, quote, "I didn't mean to do anything bad. I just wanted to hurt myself," end quote. Now, Jeanette obviously made sure to clarify with Phoebe that she wasn't having thoughts about taking her own life, and she made Phoebe promise that if she ever felt like hurting herself again, she would call Jeanette. Phoebe was also known to have a very long recovery time after a night of drinking. Usually for the next few days after a bender, she would stay in bed and sleep it off before she felt human again. But through all of the darkness and the rough things that she had going on, Phoebe did find an outlet in the way of her creativity. She was always making something beautiful, and wherever she went, she brought her diary that she was seen writing in constantly. So she would get a thought, she'd be sitting on the train, and she'd pull out her diary and write it. Or she'd be just having coffee with friends, she would have a thought, she'd pull out her diary and write about it. And Phoebe, like many others around the world who suffer and struggle with mental health issues, she struggled with it mostly on her own because, people don't want to lay that at the feet of others. They don't want to burden them. And she sort of trudged towards the light at the end of the tunnel. In mid-2009, Phoebe met 40-year-old Anthony Hampel, and he goes by the name Ant, so that's what we're going to call him. But she was just 23 years old at this point, right? And Ant was, I think, not 40 yet, but almost 40. Ant was a client of celebrity hairdresser Lindley Godfrey at Salon 579, and that's where Phoebe was working as a receptionist. And of course, Ant, like so many other men before him, he was drawn to Phoebe. So he asked her to dinner, and she accepted. Although Phoebe's family considered Ant to be a perfectly nice guy, they didn't think that the relationship would last too long because the only thing that he really shared in common with her other boyfriends was his older age. So Phoebe and Ant had, completely different experiences and lives. He was older than her, he had an established career, and he lived a very fast-paced and exciting life. So this was truly a man who looked very, very good on paper. He was attractive, he was charming, he was rich, and he owned his own business. This business was A Live Events, and I think it's supposed to be pronounced Alive Events, but there's like a little line between A and Live, so it might also be a play on his first name. And according to their website, A Live Events is a full-service, live, hybrid, and virtual event agency, and this was not some small potatoes business, right? I looked at their client list, and it's a who's who of global corporations like HP, Porsche, Walt Disney Studios, L'Oreal, 20th Century Fox, as well as celebrities and political figures like Michael Jackson, Nicole Kidman, AC/DC, Bill Clinton, Prince. It's insane. He was very, very successful when she met him. Ant was also very well connected in the entertainment world, having trained under Gary Van Egmond, who apparently is a man that's very well known in Australia's music promotion circles. But Ant was also well connected politically via his family. His father, George Hampel, was a Supreme Court judge of Victoria from 1983 to 2000. And I believe once he retired or wasn't on the Supreme Court anymore, he started teaching. George Hampel's wife and Ant's stepmother, Felicity Hampel, she's a human rights lawyer, and she's been a county court judge in Victoria since 2005. So Ant was truly born into a comfortable life of privilege, which isn't to say that he didn't work hard to get to where he is today, because both things can be true at once. Ant attended Wesley College, which is a very prestigious sort of college, and then he studied at the Victorian College of the Arts, where he wasn't like a super standout student, but if he was interested in something, he did very well. And as most young people who grow up with powerful and well-connected parents, Ant socialized with the children of his parents' friends, specifically the son of Gary von Egmond, whose name was Christo. Ant and Christo spent a lot of time together when they were teenagers, and they were together so often that Christo said Ant became like a part of their family, and eventually both young men went into the von Egmond family promotion business. And that's when Ant started to learn the tricks of the trade, and then he was able to eventually open his own business. In the 40 years before he met Phoebe Handsjuk, Ant had lived an exciting life, flying all over the world, partying with movie stars, hanging out on yachts, anything that Paris Hilton was doing, Ant Hampel was doing too. The relationship between Phoebe and Ant progressed very quickly, and only 5 months had passed before Ant asked Phoebe to come live with him in his 12th floor luxury apartment at the Valencia. Now, remember when Phoebe's friend Alice said that Phoebe could not be kept? Well, I think, and this is my opinion, but I think Ant wanted to keep her. And very soon after becoming involved with Ant, Phoebe made some noticeable changes. She quit her job at the hair salon, and it's suggested that Ant had told her this position was sort of beneath the lifestyle that he wanted them to have and to project. Kind of like my girlfriend is not going to work at a hair salon sort of thing, like no girlfriend of mine is going to be a receptionist at a hair salon. So Ant ended up getting her another job at an advertising agency called Savvy. And this advertising agency was owned by a friend of his, and apparently he thought that this job was more suited to, I guess, the lifestyle that he wanted them to project. But Phoebe only worked there 3 days a week, which gave her enough money to pay Ant for rent and living expenses, I guess. But it wasn't enough money for her to actually, save money or develop something on her own. The impression that I got from my research is that Ant was very type A. He was structured, scheduled, he worked a lot, he worked hard, and he liked things the way he liked them, to the point of being almost controlling. No, not almost controlling, to the point of being actually controlling. When Ant and Phoebe began dating, she started to drift away from her childhood friends, and eventually she stopped seeing them altogether. She cut her beautiful, long brown hair short. She dyed it black, a very modern and sophisticated look. And Ant had a sister named Chrissy, and we will talk about her because there's some stuff with that, with Chrissy. But if you look at pictures of Chrissy Hampel and you look at pictures of Phoebe after she got this new look, they almost look identical. So clearly there was some influence happening there. Ant also had a cleaner come into his apartment every week on Wednesday, and this cleaner claims that he was very particular about how the apartment would be cleaned and kept. Specifically, he wanted it to look as if nobody lived there. So Phoebe and Ant, like I said, they were from two different worlds. They lived these very opposite lives. Phoebe was most comfortable in jeans with her hair down, finding a small patch of sunlight somewhere to sit and write in. She was laid back. She was free-spirited. And Ant was the kind of man who owned his own tuxedo, right? Maybe more than one. And he would wear his tuxedos to these glittering events where he would rub shoulders with Melbourne's elite. He was poised, he was polished, he wanted everything in his life to reflect that. So I think he maybe felt that he had to polish Phoebe up too, to fit into that world, which often left her feeling that she wasn't good enough and that she was traveling further and further away from who she was, her true self. Friends and family of Phoebe's said that when they visited her at the apartment where she lived with Ant, there was no sign that she even lived there. There's a couple framed pictures that she was in, but nothing other than that to show that she even existed in that apartment. At her mother Natalie's house, Phoebe's art pieces could be seen all over, her frenzied and creative personality visible to anyone who walked through the door, but there was none of that in Ant's marble and glass fortress. Many people thought that she was afraid to make a mess or leave something out. She was probably a disorganized sort of person. Artistic types usually are. She was probably super messy. Like if you looked at my workspace right now, you would be disgusted. There's papers all over the place. I think there's a coffee cup from like 2 days ago that still has coffee in it. It's a mess. And that's just because my brain's going like boom, boom, boom from one thing to the other. Also, I have ADD, so I'm not super concerned about keeping everything clean and organized all the time. But Ant was. Apparently, when she was still working at the salon before she'd quit, Phoebe had left early one day because she was extremely stressed out that she had gotten a stain on the carpet. And this is a white carpet, and Aunt was like crazy about keeping the white carpet clean. So she'd gotten a stain on it. And so she was so anxious and so worried, and she wanted to get back to the apartment and try to clean the stain on the carpet before he got home from work. And one afternoon, her grandmother, Jeanette, came over for tea to the apartment, and she said, they were talking, having a normal conversation, but there was a cup left out on the counter, and it seemed to be almost distracting Phoebe from their conversation, and she had to get up in the middle of them talking to remove the glass from the counter and put it away. So she's clearly had conversations with Aunt before where he's been like, this is how I want things and this is how they need to be done. And she just didn't want to maybe upset him or have to have a conversation about it. I don't know. It's very 50s housewife. In the year before her death, Phoebe had started seeing a psychologist named Johanna Young, and Phoebe had told Johanna that Aunt put her down and made her feel stupid. And a man like this, a man who likes things the way he likes them and is very protective over his possessions, he can be prone to jealousy as well. I don't know if the relationship between Phoebe and Aunt was ever really good because I wasn't a participant in it, so I can't know for sure. Some people say that he made her very happy. Some people say he made her happy in the beginning, and then the more controlling and kind of jealous and possessive he got, the more she started to feel trapped and smothered and bad about herself. Phoebe was still struggling with alcohol, and Aunt was constantly telling her that she drank too much and he wanted her to stop. But then he would also bring her to these social events where there's literally nothing else to do besides stand around in like your $5,000 ball gown and drink. Now, one time after they'd started dating, Aunt had to travel to Paris, and he'd made Phoebe promise to not drink while he was gone. But then she went to an art exhibit and she had some drinks, and that whole night Aunt was blowing up her phone, calling her, trying to Skype her, and Phoebe's mother, Natalie, ended up going to the art gallery to pick Phoebe up, and then she brought her back to her house, Natalie's house. But she heard a conversation between Aunt and Phoebe where they were having an argument, probably via Skype, and Aunt said that he didn't know who was sleeping in his bed. So I think that this is a sign of jealousy and insecurity on his part. He's out of the country, his girlfriend's out, she's drinking, he knows how she gets when she drinks, and maybe he's worried that while he's away, she's going to be bringing other men home to his precious apartment. There's also another report that Phoebe had started taking art and writing classes at a local adult education school, and she seemed to have developed an infatuation with one of her professors, an older married man. Allegedly, she sent him an email demanding that he have an affair with her, and the professor did not like this, right? So he reported her to the school for harassment and stalking, and she was removed from the school. And I'm not sure if this happened right before Aunt or right in the beginning of when they were dating, but either way, clearly things were not ideal between the couple. And many who were close to Phoebe reported that she wanted out, and she was also kind of afraid that Aunt may propose to her when they went on a trip to Paris that they were planning for the following December. Phoebe had also told her mother that the trip to Paris was causing her anxiety because they'd been arguing so much lately that she worried if they were in Paris, a different country, and they started arguing, and then she, left or walked away, or he walked away from her, she'd be sort of left alone in a strange place with no money. And this money thing does come up sometimes, and I don't hear it talked about as often in the reportings of this case. And I think it's more important than others have seemed to feel that it was, because Phoebe didn't have money, but Aunt did. Now you're going to say they're together, so they both have money, right? No, not really. It's Aunt's money, right? They're not married. She's living at his apartment, but she's paying him rent. And I don't know whose idea it was that she pay him rent, but I feel like it was hers, kind of. Like, there's not going to be any red in my ledger. But still there's going to be, right? Because everything else that you need, he's got to buy it for you because you're not working enough to buy it for yourself because he made you get this job where you're only working 3 days a week. So I think she constantly thought about how it was very unequal and the power was very off. She didn't have her own money. So if she left him, what would happen? Where would she go? What would she do? If there was ever a case where they argued about something, what's he going to hold over her head? It seems that Phoebe started making some plans 2 months before her death. It appears that Phoebe's mother had given Phoebe a trip overseas for her 21st birthday, and on October 5th, 2010, Phoebe called her mother Natalie, who was out of town at that time, and she asked if that trip was still on the table because she might have to get out of the country quickly without anyone knowing. On October 20th, Phoebe left the Valencia apartment building, and she had no plans to ever come back. She was going to leave Aunt. And that night, she stayed at her mother's house, even though Natalie was out of town. And Natalie, Phoebe's mother, was out of town for quite a long time. She was out of town, I believe, for 8 weeks. And she wouldn't come back until, I believe, the day before or the day of Phoebe's death. But Natalie had a boyfriend. His name was Russell Marriott. He seems like a really great guy. Russell Marriott seemed to be a very steady force in Phoebe's life. He was kind of always there to talk if she needed to talk. And this is what, I think all young girls want in a stepfather. Like, we all hope that our mothers, if they remarry after they divorce our fathers, marry somebody who's going to be awesome. And Russell Marriott was awesome. So the next day after this, Phoebe took a train and a bus to Malakuta. And Malakuta is a small town in East Gippsland where Phoebe's grandmother, Jeanette, lived. Now remember, Jeanette had always been Phoebe's confidant, so it made sense that with so much going on, with so much weighing on her mind, Phoebe would need someone to talk to, and she would be willing to travel the 9 hours from Melbourne to Malakuta to talk to her grandmother. Phoebe told Jeanette that her long-term plan was to eventually move to India and do volunteer work, but in the interim, she needed someplace calm and quiet and peaceful to make these plans. So she was leaving Aunt and she was going to stay in Malakuta, where she would get a job and figure everything out. Jeanette was all for this plan, but she gave Phoebe some advice that she now regrets. Jeanette told Phoebe, don't run away from your problems. You need to do this the right way. You need to go back to Melbourne. You need to resign from your job like a responsible adult, and you need to tell your boyfriend face to face that it's over and why. And then after you tie up all your loose ends, come back to Malakuta and we can move forward knowing that you've closed this last chapter. You've closed the door on your past. Now, in hindsight, this is very good advice. Jeanette's telling Phoebe, adults handle things head on. They don't just run away. So you need to go and tie up your loose ends and, let the people know who are in your life that you're not going to be in their life anymore. But then obviously after what happened to Phoebe, Jeanette feels that she probably gave her bad advice. And if you're listening to this, Jeanette, or if anybody else is listening to this who's given similar advice or who has regrets about giving advice like this, don't feel guilty, because I don't think that any advice that Phoebe would have gotten would have changed the outcome, specifically because Phoebe was just this sort of very independent-minded, stubborn even kind of person who, once she had her mind made up, it was over. Phoebe stayed with her grandmother, Jeanette, for 3 days, and during that time, she actually contacted a family friend who owned a local golf club in the area. Now, Malakuta had a small population for most of the year, but in the summer, it blew up, right? It was filled up with tourists trying to escape the heat of the city. So Phoebe asked this guy if he could employ her at his golf club during the busy season, and he agreed. Phoebe also attended an AA meeting in Malakuta because one of her goals for the future was to stop drinking alcohol completely, a feat that she had tried to accomplish many times before, but she'd been unable to. Now, a woman from AA drove Phoebe back to Jeanette's after the meeting, and the two of them talked during the ride. Phoebe told this woman about her relationship problems, and the woman remembered that Phoebe's phone kept ringing and ringing. Phoebe told her that it was her boyfriend Aunt calling, and she wished that he would stop. But Phoebe must have picked up one of his phone calls at some point, because on October 24th, she told her grandmother she was going back to Melbourne, not to break the news to Aunt that it was over, but to give it another shot, to make it work. Later, Phoebe told her grandmother that they had talked it out and that she'd agreed to limit her drinking, and then things sort of went back to normal, which meant that Phoebe went back to a job she didn't really care about, and she continued to live in an apartment that had about as much warmth as an ice cube sitting on top of a pile of snow. On November 17th, Phoebe and Aunt had dinner at the home of their friends, Linda and Arch Cohen. Linda Cohen remembered that on this night, Aunt and Phoebe got into a small argument about Phoebe checking texts on her phone. And then after they ate, Aunt wanted to go home, but Phoebe wanted to stay, so he left her there. And then after Arch went to bed, Phoebe and Linda stayed up talking for hours. Linda said, quote, "We discussed all sorts of things: alcoholism, growing up, parents, drug use, and her relationship with Aunt," end quote. From this conversation, we are able to get some insight into Phoebe's drug use. She told Linda that the only drug she had never tried was heroin, and she preferred to use cocaine and marijuana over alcohol because alcohol made her depressed the next day, and these drugs did not. Now, this surprised Linda, who had not realized how much of a problem Phoebe's depression and, alcohol drinking was. And Linda was also shocked when Phoebe told her that she'd once pulled a chair out onto the balcony of Aunt's Valencia apartment so that she could stand on the rail. Linda was like, "No, you shouldn't do that. That's dangerous. And taking your own life is a very selfish act. And imagine how traumatic it will be for the person who finds you." And Phoebe didn't argue with this. She was like, "Yeah, it is selfish. I wouldn't do that." But Phoebe also said that she decided to go back to her plan of leaving Aunt and staying in Malakuta with her grandmother until she got her life back on track. And Linda Cohen was very supportive of this. She was like, "Yeah, you should. If you're not happy, you should do something else." And Linda offered to drive Phoebe back to Aunt's apartment the next morning and help her pack. But when they woke up the next day, Linda was once again shocked to see that Phoebe had already started drinking. Shortly after Phoebe got up, she started drinking. The two women did go to the Valencia apartment while Aunt was at work. This was November 18th. And Linda told Phoebe, "Let's go up, but we have to make sure that we get everything. We can't leave anything behind. This way you won't have an excuse or a reason to return, or he won't be able to call you and be like, 'Hey, you left your face wash here, come back and get it,' and then kind of rope you into a talk that ends up with you staying with him." That night, Phoebe once again spent the night at her mother's house, even though Natalie was still not home and wasn't returning until the next month. Apparently, after they'd gotten Phoebe's stuff out of the apartment, Linda had felt that Phoebe had consumed too much alcohol to safely make that long trip to Jeanette's house in Malakuta, so Phoebe ended up staying at her mom's house, which was closer to the Valencia. On November 19th, Phoebe spent the night again with Linda and Arch Cohen, and while she was there, she sent her mother an email asking if Natalie's cottage in Malakuta was available to rent. And this shows me that Phoebe was seriously contemplating and planning to do this. She was planning to leave Aunt. She was planning to move to Malakuta. She was getting a job. She was getting a place to live. And she also knew, that she was a grown woman and she couldn't obviously live with her grandmother forever. And I also think that Phoebe was the person who enjoyed her own space to be creative if she wanted to be sad and down when she was feeling sad and down, to be herself without any barriers or boundaries, so she wanted her own space. Now, the next morning, November 20th, Linda Cohen said Phoebe woke up with a clear head and she spent the morning doing some drawings for Linda and writing some poetry. But something had changed overnight. Phoebe was no longer planning to go to Malakuta that day. Instead, she called Aunt Hampel and asked him to meet her so that they could talk. And after this, she moved back to the Valencia. Whatever agreement that they'd come to or whatever peace that they had achieved on the 20th was short-lived. 3 days later, Phoebe called her father, Len Handsjuk, and Phoebe told him that Aunt had kicked her out. So Len canceled the rest of his appointments for that day, and he went to pick her up. He found her standing outside with a suitcase, and he drove her back to his apartment where he lived with Phoebe's brother, Tom, in South Bank, a Melbourne suburb. Phoebe stayed here for a few days, but on the evening of November 25th, she went out to dinner with Aunt. He asked her to go out to dinner with him, and she agreed. And during this dinner, Aunt convinced her to come back to him at the Valencia. So when she went back to Len's place, she informed him that she was going back to Melbourne the next day, and there was nothing that he could say to change her mind, even though he did obviously try to change her mind. This was a Thursday night when Phoebe made this decision. Exactly a week later, she would be dead at the bottom of a trash chute in that apartment building. The next day, Phoebe had lunch with Linda Cohen, and according to Linda, Phoebe seemed to be feeling much more positively about her relationship. She was in good spirits, and she spoke of how she was looking forward to the Paris trip that she and Aunt were going on the following month in December. So this was a weekend, the weekend before Phoebe's untimely death, and also the weekend before her younger brother Nikolai's 17th birthday party. On Sunday night, Phoebe Skyped with her mother, Natalie, and Natalie said that wherever Phoebe was in the apartment, it was completely dark. Phoebe's face was only lit by the glow from her phone screen. And they were, talking about Nikolai's party, which was going to happen the following Friday. They were talking about, decorating and things. But Natalie obviously was also aware that things had been rocky between Phoebe and Aunt. She'd been talking to Len. She'd been talking to her own mother, Jeanette. So one of the first things she asked Phoebe was, how were things between them? How were things between Phoebe and Aunt? And she says that Phoebe quietly raised one finger and put it to her mouth, like this, as if to shush her. And then she said casually in a normal voice, Aunt and I are watching a DVD together. Natalie and Phoebe had planned to meet the following Friday to decorate for Nikolai's party. They said their goodbyes and they hung up. And this is the last time that Natalie would see her daughter alive. The next morning, Phoebe met her father, Len, at French Fantasies, which is a bakery in South Yarra. It was a weekly event that they would meet for breakfast on Monday mornings, and Len said that he not only enjoyed having the opportunity to see Phoebe regularly every Monday, but it also gave him an opportunity to check in with Phoebe every week so he could kind of gauge how she was doing. Once a psychiatrist, always a psychiatrist, I guess, right? I'm so glad I don't have like a mental health professional for a parent, because I've always felt that that would be really difficult, because you'd always feel like your father or your mother was like in a session with you, and it's not their fault. They can't turn it on and off. That's what they know and what they do, but it would drive me crazy. Now, Len himself had a birthday coming up the next day, and there was a family party that was planned for Wednesday. But Phoebe told Len that she and Aunt couldn't attend the family birthday party because they had tickets to a U2 concert. She was a big fan. It was supposed to be this big event. Like, you couldn't even get tickets for it anymore. They were selling for like $7,000 online. And she was looking forward to going, but she promised her father that Thursday night, she and Aunt would have dinner with him for his birthday at her favorite restaurant in Melbourne, the Golden Triangle. After breakfast, Phoebe met with her psychologist, Johanna Young, who later told police that on this day, Phoebe's mood was very low. After this, Phoebe rode her bike to the hair salon she'd been working at when she'd met Aunt, and she had coffee with her old boss, Lindley Godfrey. Then she rode back to the Valencia. Now in the foyer, bike in hand, she saw the manager of the Valencia. His name is Eric Giamario, and he had some good news for her, or at least he thought it was good news. When Phoebe had moved into the Valencia, there hadn't been bike spaces available, in the parking garage. So she'd have to lug her bike inside the Valencia. She'd have to put it in the elevator, then bring it up and store it in her apartment. So Eric was super excited to tell her that he now had a bike space for her, so she wouldn't have to drive her bike around the building anymore. And he thought she would be, happy about it. He thought she would be her normal, smiling and outgoing self, especially after getting this news. But Eric found this afternoon she was different. He said, quote, "She hardly seemed to notice me when I gave her the news. Usually Phoebe was cheerful and polite, but that day she wasn't her normal self at all." End quote. That evening, Aunt got home from work a bit earlier than usual, just before 4 p.m., because he and Phoebe had dinner plans with friends of his, the Rockmans. Before they left to go to dinner, the couple had a conversation about Phoebe's drinking, and Aunt was pretty much like, I don't want you drinking that much, because you know how you get when you drink, and Phoebe promised to only have 2 glasses of wine. But she either ended up having more, or as her parents suggested, she was kind of a lightweight and, she became drunk. She was sort of acting drunk. And reportedly, Aunt felt that Phoebe, after drinking, kind of began to overshare with Mrs. Rockman about her struggles with depression. And this apparently embarrassed Aunt. So he tried to get the message to her non-verbally. He tried to shoot her some looks. That didn't work. He kind of tried interrupting and interjecting, trying to change the subject. That didn't work. So he cut the dinner short and he took Phoebe home. Later, Phoebe told her friend, Vanessa Levin, that Aunt didn't like what she was saying to Julia Rockman, and they fought in the car on the way home. They got back to the Valencia at 7:50 p.m. Phoebe kept drinking, the two argued, and then Aunt gave up and locked himself in the bedroom. Phoebe called her friend Linda Cohen at 8:30 p.m. and asked if she could go over to Linda's house and stay the night. Linda said she could, but then also pointed out that she had to get up early the next morning. So if Phoebe was going to come and spend the night, then, she just couldn't stay up talking all night like they'd done in the past because Linda had things to do the next day. Next, Phoebe called her mother's boyfriend, Russell, and told him about the argument. But when he asked her, what are you going to do? She said that she was just going to stick it out. After this, Phoebe called Bren Hessian at around 10:30. So Bren was a young man that Phoebe had met through her 30-year-old teacher boyfriend. Phoebe had also dated Bren's older brother for a little while, but after that, she and Bren had remained close. They were very good friends, and she would even sometimes tell people that he was her soulmate. So Bren became a person that Phoebe confided in, and she would seek him out in times of trouble when she needed consoling. 4 days before this, Phoebe had called Bren wanting to meet, and she told him, that she and Aunt had broken up, but Bren had been working at that time, so they'd never gotten together. Tonight, Bren was free, so they agreed to meet up in Melbourne for drinks at the European Beer Cafe an hour later at 11:30. So before we continue on, I need to explain something. Phoebe had 2 phones, an iPhone 3 and a Nokia phone. The iPhone 3 was under Aunt's name. He paid for it. He gave it to her to use. The Nokia phone was Phoebe's, and it was also activated, but Phoebe had told Aunt that she kept it because there were certain numbers in the Nokia phone that she didn't want to lose, and she either didn't want to enter those numbers into the iPhone or she didn't feel like taking the time to do it. So when Bren walked into the bar, he said Phoebe was super excited to see him. She ran and she jumped on him with both her arms and legs, and he had no choice but to catch her. He said she was in a great mood, and it seemed maybe as if she'd had a couple of drinks, but he didn't think that she was drunk. While she and Bren sat and talked, both of her phones were ringing. Her iPhone was, I believe, out on the table. Her Nokia phone was in her purse. Aunt was calling her iPhone repeatedly. And cell phone records show that in a 1-hour period that night, he called her 27 times. Phoebe's Nokia phone was also ringing, and it was her mother's boyfriend, Russell Marriott, and he was calling because apparently Phoebe's Nokia phone in her purse had been pocket dialing him, but when he called back, she didn't answer, and he got worried, which prompted Russell to call Natalie, Phoebe's mother, and let her know his concerns. And then Natalie called Aunt, Phoebe's boyfriend, to find out where Phoebe was, to which he replied that she'd left the apartment drunk and he had no idea where she was, but she was probably out drinking with her deadbeat alcoholic friends. Back at the bar, Phoebe and Bren were not together for too long. I think they only had like a drink for about a half an hour. And at midnight, they left the bar and they prepared to go their separate ways because Bren had to get home. He also had to get up early in the morning. And at this point, Phoebe became so agitated by the constant calls from Aunt coming into her iPhone, she threw her phone in a gutter and Bren had to go and get it for her. Bren told Phoebe to go home and, rest and talk to Aunt. And then he drove away, and he said the last time he saw her, she was skipping down Exhibition Street. So after this, Phoebe went to her mother's house in Clifton Hill, and this seems to be just about a 10-minute drive away. I'm not sure how she got there, whether she took a cab or if she walked. If she walked, it would have taken about an hour. Either way, she got there. And she had a cup of tea with Russell Marriott, her mom's boyfriend, and they stayed up talking until about 3 a.m. At some point, Russell called Natalie and told her that Phoebe was with him and safe, but he said she was drunk and she was going to be spending the night. Before Phoebe went to sleep, she asked Russell to make sure to wake her up in the morning because her attendance at work had apparently been very spotty in the last month or so, and she was worried that if she didn't show up or if she was late, she was going to get fired. And I think, once again, the prospect of being completely financially dependent on Aunt really scared Phoebe. Unfortunately, Phoebe did not make it into work the next morning. She did leave her mother's house in Clifton Hill, but she went back to the Valencia, and then I believe that she probably went back to bed for a couple hours. Aunt had already left for work, so she was alone, and at around noon, Phoebe made some phone calls. She called the Alfred Hospital Crisis Center, and this is a facility meant for emergency mental health crises. She also called her primary care physician, and then she called her psychologist, Johanna Young, to see if they could meet that day, because apparently Phoebe felt she really needed it. Phoebe and Johanna talked for about 30 minutes, but Johanna didn't have any available appointments that day, so Phoebe told Johanna that she was distressed distressed about her drinking and her relationship. And later, Johanna stated that this was the first time she'd heard Phoebe go from ideation to intention, meaning that her psychiatrist felt Phoebe was doing more than thinking about taking her own life, that she'd actually transitioned into wanting to. Now, Johanna Young said Phoebe never stated this outright, that she wanted to take her own life, but it was definitely the impression that she got, and she later regretted not calling a crisis team to go and check on Phoebe. Instead, Johanna suggested that if Phoebe continued to feel bad, she could call some hotlines. Now, this is where I will say that, Johanna Young regretted this, and she should have regretted this, because if she felt that Phoebe was really struggling in the way she was, and she said that she did feel that way, that she was struggling, she should have called crisis workers or done something, because, that's your job. That's your job, to be in charge or responsible for your patient's mental health issues. And when somebody's expressing to you something that makes you worried for them, you need to do something about it. But, she regrets it now. That same afternoon, using her Nokia phone, Phoebe called Bren Hessian and left a message saying that if he didn't call her back right away, she was going to throw her phone away and leave the world. Bren didn't hear this message until 6 p.m., but he claimed that her words didn't really shock him because she'd said and done things like this before. So this was kind of typical for her. But when he tried to call her back, her phone was off. So he was never able to, confirm. Another young man from Phoebe's past received a communication from her that day. She'd apparently met this man in 2009 while she was studying fine art printmaking at the Center for Adult Education, and the two of them clicked immediately because they had shared experiences of depression and drug use. So this guy's name is not public, so I don't want to use his name, but I'm just going to say this guy, this man, and hopefully you know who I'm talking about. So Phoebe and this guy, they saw each other almost every day until this guy decided he wanted to get his life back on track. And he kind of pulled away from Phoebe a little bit because she was very much still in that world of drinking and doing drugs. He said, quote, "She loved drugs. All her stories of good times seemed to revolve around drugs," end quote. But then he got this Facebook message from her, right, suggesting that they reconnect. And he was like, okay. Phoebe had wrote to him that she was going through some hard things, and she felt that she had gone to her family so many times for support. She didn't feel comfortable continuing to do so, to continue to burden them with that. So they agreed to meet for coffee at 4 p.m., not far from the Valencia. And during their time together that day, at least while they were having coffee, this guy found Phoebe to be calm, lucid, and confident as she talked about going to India to volunteer in a village. And she talked about all these plans she had. In fact, this guy said that it was the best conversation that they'd ever had together. Phoebe also claimed that she felt her life with Ant had separated her from reality. She was literally living in the clouds, above everyone else. She'd become detached from real people and real issues that people face every day. She also said that she believed Ant deserved better than her because she was working such a menial job, and it was probably an embarrassment to him. Now, after coffee, this man drove to the Valencia so that Phoebe could grab her Nokia phone, and when she got back in his car, Phoebe asked him to drive her to Port Melbourne so she could buy drugs. Phoebe purchased 2 ecstasy pills, and then they went to this guy's house where he believed she either took one as soon as they got there or on the way to his house. Because at some point while they were there and they were looking at his art, she tried to kiss him. And when he asked her to stop and not do that, he says she became violent. She was allegedly punching and kicking him, and he had to restrain her until she calmed down. He said that he told Phoebe he couldn't handle her while she was like this, and he was going to take her back to the Valencia, but she didn't want to go back to the Valencia. But she felt she had no place else she could go. Phoebe then ran outside of this guy's house and began playing chicken with cars in the street. But this guy says that she picked slow-moving cars to do with. She was just kind of like having fun and being goofy, and she was never in danger. This guy then drove her back to Melbourne, and during the car ride, apparently Phoebe had these violent mood swings. She would be happy 1 minute, talkative the next, silent the next, yelling the next. And I guess he was driving her to the Valencia, but at some point when they were in West Melbourne near Festival Hill, Phoebe demanded that he let her out of the car. And this was around 9:30 p.m. But Phoebe didn't get back to the apartment until 12:30 in the morning, so 3 hours later. And nobody knows what she did or who she saw in that 3-hour period. Now, earlier that day, after Aunt had gotten home at 6 and Phoebe wasn't there, he texted her friend, Bren Hessian, asking, where Phoebe was. But I don't think Bren and Aunt were on the best terms. I don't think they'd ever spoken to each other before, but they just generally probably didn't like each other based on whatever Phoebe was telling one about the other. So when Bren gets this text from Aunt, I don't know if he knew it was Aunt. He probably did, but he didn't respond to that text since the two men had never spoken before. The next morning was Wednesday, and this would be the day before Phoebe's death. And these 2 days have come into question often, considering that there's certain timelines and stories that don't add up. And I mean the day before her death and the day of. Aunt claimed that when he got up to leave for work on that Wednesday, Phoebe was still asleep because she had been drinking and doing drugs for the past couple of days, and apparently she needed to sleep this off, and this was something he was used to. But when Aunt left the apartment, he took 2 things with him: Phoebe's iPhone 3 and a bottle of Stillnox tablets. So allegedly, the iPhone was broken or not working in some way. Either the screen had cracked when Phoebe had thrown it a few nights prior, or it wasn't charging. The reason is never made completely clear, and it's reported as being different things. But Aunt was supposed to bring it to a repair shop to have it fixed. That was his plan. The Stillnox tablets were sleeping pills, and these sleeping pills had been prescribed to Aunt. And this is where things get a little confusing. So Aunt didn't take the pills with him that morning when he left for work. So after Aunt left for work that morning, he and Phoebe's mother, Natalie, were texting constantly, concerned about how Phoebe was doing, because they'd both apparently gotten this text from Phoebe that had been sent from her iPhone at 10:30 that morning. The text had been sent to Natalie, Phoebe's mother, Len, Phoebe's father, Aunt, Phoebe's boyfriend, Phoebe's boss, Phoebe's brothers, Tom and Nikolai, and her grandmother, Jeanette. And here's what that text said. "Hi, family. I'm in bed and about to sleep, and when I wake, I will transform into the most incredible human being you've ever seen. Not. I will go to the hospital. It's safe there, and I hear the special tonight is tomato soup. Delicious. Nutritious. I love you all very much, but not enough to send an individual text. Sorry about that, but time is asleep, and I must be on my way. Merrily, merrily, merrily. Life is but a dream. XO." Okay, so here's problem number 1. That text was sent from Phoebe's iPhone, but according to Aunt's initial statement to the police later, he was in possession of her iPhone at 10:30 a.m. when the text went out, because he'd left for work at 9, and he said he took her iPhone with him. So Natalie, Phoebe's mother, gets this text and is obviously concerned. So she and Aunt are discussing the text, and Aunt was like, "Yeah, I haven't seen the text yet, but when I left this morning, Phoebe was sleeping peacefully. But you know what? I'll go back to the Valencia and check this afternoon to make sure everything's okay," which he claims he did do. He says he went back to the apartment to check on her around midday, and she was sleeping still. And it was during this midday visit that Aunt claimed Phoebe told him she'd taken 2 of his sleeping pills, the Stillnox. And before he left to go back to work, he took the bottle with him to make sure that she didn't wake up and take more, either accidentally or on purpose. Here's problem number 2. There's no record of Aunt returning to the apartment that day. As we discussed previously, a resident cannot get into that building without swiping their keycard several times, right, before even reaching the front door of their apartment. After Phoebe's death, her grandfather, Lorne Campbell, got the key fob records from Eric Giamario, the manager of the Valencia. And you might be wondering, what is Phoebe's grandfather doing getting involved in the investigation? But he was actually a retired police detective with over 30 years of experience, and he had some big issues with the police investigation into his granddaughter's death. We're going to talk about that. So after she died and he's sort of figuring out the timelines, he gets these records and he goes through them, and he finds out that the only time Aunt's key fob showed activity in the Valencia on December 1st was when he left that morning at 9 a.m., so he'd have to put his key fob in the elevator to make it go down, and then when he returned that evening at 7:33 p.m. So how did he get back into the apartment around midday to check on Phoebe and to take the Stilnox tablets. And these two inconsistencies, the iPhone and the alleged midday visit to the apartment where Phoebe had told Aunt she'd taken sleeping pills and he left with the bottle, they will become a big focus later. And that is where we're going to end part 1 of this case, but stay tuned for part 2 because it gets even more crazy and even more confusing, and I really want us to talk about this case. But let me know in the comment section what you think so far. Let me know if you have heard of this case, if you're familiar with it, if you have theories. Let me know in the comment section. Also, let me know in the comment section if you are the son or daughter of a mental health professional and how that is. All right, so now for my creator shout out. Okay, so I've just gotten into TikTok this past month. I used to think it was stupid, and I was like, that's so stupid, and now I'm addicted, and I can't stop watching TikToks. I love it. So on TikTok, I found this beautiful young woman, and the first thing I saw of her from TikTok was on my FYP page, For You page. Saying FYP page is redundant. FY page, For You page. So I saw her, and it was a skit, and she was hilarious. Hilarious. So I'm scrolling through, and I see that she's a singer, and I'm like, okay, that's great, but this hilarious woman cannot be as funny as she is and be a good singer. And I was right. She's not a good singer. She's an amazing singer. She's amazing. She's amazing. She's funny. She's talented. She's beautiful. She's everything. And I love her, and I want this woman to get a record contract because she needs to. Okay, so I'm going to put a little clip of her skit in here, and I'm going to put a little clip of her singing, which will give you goosebumps. Goosebumps.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you. I appreciate the applause. At least someone is applauding for me in this house, and it's the cat. Thank you. This is a man's world. This is a man's world. But it wouldn't be nothing, without a woman or a girl. You see.
And then I want you to go into my description box where I put the links to her social media, and I want you to go and follow her. And if you guys know somebody who gives out record deals, if you're sitting there in the music industry and you're watching me, you need to give this girl a record deal and maybe her own show too. I think she needs her own show. She needs her own movie. She needs her own record deal. I just love her. I love her. And I never send people messages because I get messages sometimes and people are like, I love you so much. And, you know, I feel like we're connected. And I get that. I get that now. I feel you guys now, okay? Because that's how I felt. So go and check her out, please. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I guess TikTok now too. I don't post much. I'm more of a watcher, but you can go ahead and follow me there. Also, don't forget to go in the description box, get 20% off your amazing Case-Defy case. And like this video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. If you are subscribed, make sure you still are, because YouTube unsubscribes people from my channel all the time. Thank you guys so much for being here. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe, and I will see you very soon for part 2. Bye.